In Chapter 1, The Scope of Orientalism, Syed unpacks the mechanisms through which Orientalism became a powerful discourse. He examines its historical, cultural, and institutional dimensions, explaining how the concept both reflects and reinforces Western dominance over the Orient. Syed begins the chapter by defining Orientalism as a multifaceted phenomenon. It operates on three levels: as an academic discipline, as a broader style of thought distinguishing the Orient from the Occident, and as a discourse of power. The academic aspect of Orientalism is entrenched in the works of scholars who study the Orient, producing knowledge that becomes institutionalized in universities, bureaucracies, and colonial administrations. Syed argues that this knowledge is never neutral. It is deeply intertwined with power dynamics. The second dimension is a style of thought that categorically separates the East and the West. The Orient is portrayed as exotic, mysterious, and backward, while the West is seen as rational, progressive, and superior. This ontological and epistemological distinction creates a dichotomy, serving as a foundation for cultural and political representations of the East. Finally, Syed situates Orientalism within the framework of Foucault's concept of discourse. As a discourse, Orientalism constitutes a systematic body of knowledge that shapes how the Orient is perceived and engaged with. This system of knowledge authorizes the West to dominate, restructure, and manage the East, presenting it as an entity that must be controlled for its own good and for the benefit of the West. Syed traces the historical roots of Orientalism to the late 18th century, a period marked by European imperial expansion. During this time, British and French powers dominated large swaths of Orient. Their military, political, and economic interests in the region were accompanied by a vast corpus of Orientalist texts, artworks, and scientific studies that sought to know the East. The proximity of the Orient to Europe played a significant role in shaping this relationship. The Orient, particularly India and the biblical lands, was central to European imagination and material exploitation. Syed highlights how colonial administrators, missionaries, and scholars contributed to creating an Orient that suited Western needs and reinforced Western superiority. This enterprise was not limited to academic circles, it extended to literature, art, and popular culture, producing a cohesive narrative of the East as the exotic and inferior. An important concept in Chapter 1 is imaginative geography, which refers to the spatial and cultural distinctions created by the West to define the East. Syed argues that the Orient is not a neutral geographical entity. It is a constructed space laden with meanings assigned by the West. This construction is deeply rooted in the idea of Europe's superiority and its mission to civilize and dominate. Imaginative geography manifests in representations that often ignore the complexities and realities of the Orient. Instead, the East is reduced to sensual harem, the despotic ruler, or the mystical sage. These representations serve to justify European interventions by portraying the Orient as incapable of self governance or progress. Orientalism is not merely about representation, it is also about power. Drawing on Foucault's notion of discourse, Syed explains that the production of knowledge about the Orient is inseparable from the exercise of power over it. The West's ability to define and describe the East gives it authority to dominate and reshape it. This relationship of power is evident in the colonial context, where knowledge about the Orient was used to control its people, resources, and territories. Orientalism, therefore, is more than a collection of stereotypes or prejudices. It is a hegemonic system that permeates cultural, academic, and political institutions, shaping perceptions and policies. For example, colonial administrators relied on Orientalist texts to govern effectively, while artists and writers reinforced these ideas through their works. The interdependence of knowledge and power ensures that Orientalism remains a durable and self sustaining system. Orientalism denies the Orient its agency and voice. The East is rarely allowed to represent itself. Instead, it is spoken for and about by Westerners. This dynamic creates a one sided narrative in which the perspective becomes the dominant lens through which the Orient is understood. Syed explains this point with examples from literature and scholarship. He discusses how writers like Flaubert depicted the Orient through their own subjective experiences, projecting their fantasies and biases onto the region. These representations, though often fictional or exaggerated, gained legitimacy through their repetition in various cultural forms. Despite changes in political and cultural contexts, Orientalism has remained a resilient framework. Syed attributes its durability to its entrenchment in Western culture and its alignment with hegemonic interests. Even in the modern era, Orientalist tropes persist in media, policy, and academia, shaping how the East is perceived and engaged with. Syed warns against the assumption that Orientalism is merely a relic of the colonial past. He argues that it continues to influence contemporary attitudes and policies, particularly in the context of American involvement in the Middle East. The portrayal of the region as a site of violence, instability, and religious fanaticism reflects the enduring power of Orientalist narratives. In Chapter 1, Syed provides a comprehensive framework for understanding the origins, development, and implications of Orientalism. By analyzing Orientalism as an academic field, a style of thought, and a discourse of power, he reveals how the West constructs and maintains its dominance over the East. Through concepts like imaginative geography and the critique of representation, Syed challenges readers to question the narratives that shape their understanding of the world. Syed's analysis is not merely an academic exercise, it is a call to critically examine the structures of knowledge and power that perpetuate inequality and misrepresentation. By deconstructing Orientalism, Syed urges us to move towards a more equitable and nuanced engagement with the East, one that respects its diversity and complexity rather than reducing it to simplistic